Hey guys, welcome back to another GameSkinny Writers Workshop. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. I had some technical things that had to get figured out, but they should be all solved now, so I think we're good to go. I hope we're good to go. Things went a little bit rough last week for some of you who were there with me for that. Hey guys, welcome back. I had some weird audio feedback there, wow. So if anyone who is watching would not mind popping into the chat, which I have nice and neat over here, to just let me know that everything's working and look good, that would be great. So again, thanks so much for joining me, especially at a new workshop time. I'm a creature of habit as much as anyone else. I didn't want to change things on you guys, but I absolutely had to. Hello friends! Okay, so this might be the schedule that we're operating on from here on out. It's a little bit easier for me to make work with my current living situation, but we'll see how it works out. We can always switch back if you guys, hate it. So there were a lot of new names that I saw participating in workshop this week, which always makes me happy. I love to see new people. So warm welcome to everybody who participated, pitched in for the first time, and thanks so much to everybody who put something, in the pot, who cranked out articles this week. There were so many interesting visions of reboots that you guys put out, and they were a blast to read. So I've got 3 articles up for us to look at today, and the first one is from Zach Long, who was our winner from last week, and he wrote about the Legend of Dragoon. I hope I am saying that right. And next up, we have Elijah Beam, who wrote about Red Faction. And then third, we have our challenge winner for the week, Stan Rizet, I think is how I'm supposed to pronounce that. I am not entirely sure. But he wrote about rebooting the Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl franchise. So, if you've been with me in workshop before, you know that I like to get to talking about the good stuff that articles do before I talk about the stuff that they can improve on. It's just good to, have that backdrop of here's what's been done right, so you have examples to hold up when you're talking about what could be done better. So, let's get this thing rolling. We're going to start with Zach. In Zach's article, there were a lot of good visual landmarks. You see, there's a lot of nice headers, we have a lot of images happening here, and I'm going to talk a little bit more later in the workshop about visual landmarks. All you really need to know right now is that having stuff like this in there, these nice, pretty, shiny things to kind of draw the eye around the page, they just help keep your reader from becoming too overwhelmed by having too much text at once. So, let's move to Elijah's article. He had a lot of really smooth writing. There were a lot of places where the sentences flowed together really well, the writing was very crisp, very clear. There wasn't a lot that I was going in, fixing, changing, grammatically, technically, stylistically, whatever you want to call it. And he also had a really nice intro, which I will be using as an example for something I'm going to be talking about in just a little bit. But he did a great job on that. So moving on to Stan's, we have again these nice inline images. We have these headers. We have some bolding here. Just to kind of further break up the text. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, this was the longest article that we had come in. Let me check over here and see precisely. 1,100 words. I asked for 300 and you guys gave me 1,100, and that's awesome. So, let's see. I also wanted to talk about the fact that Stan took a very interesting approach to his voice here. When you're writing articles like this, when you're writing op-ed articles, it is okay to kind of play around with voice, play around with your presentation a little bit. And Stan did something really interesting. He, instead of saying, this is what it would look like to me, this is how I would view it, this is what I would do, this is what I would want, which was totally fine, that is not in any way wrong. He decided to take a slightly more, I don't want to call it first person, that's not at all the word that I want, but it's a much more, I want to say, immediate approach to the prompt, and that, let me see if I can find, okay, like his main story description here, where a lot of you said, I would like to see a story that deals with this, or I would like to see a story that comes out of this story. Here's what Stan has. Set in an alternative 2003, rumors have emerged that the USSR has been using artifacts found in the zone for weapons development. In response, the CIA has deployed an operative task to see if there to see if there is any truth to these rumors. And if so, then the agent is tasked with dismantling this secret weapons facility. The player enters this zone with a group of freelance stalkers, and from that point must fight against or work with other factions, do some side work, and learn about the zone. So, that sounds like something that you would see on the back of the game box. That sounds like, you know, the little meta description, or whatever you want to call it, that brief summary of what you're in for. And what that does here, he's taking a very clear voice here. He's inhabiting, you know, a certain perspective, as much as he possibly can. And so he's using this very immediate, very like back of the game box sounding style, and that worked really well for him in this case, because when you're talking about something like a reboot and you're trying to share this grand vision with an audience, presenting it this way, presenting it as if it were the kind of content you would see on the back of the game case, or, you know, on the Steam store page or whatever, that really helps draw the reader in. It makes it a lot more immediate for your reader, and having an interesting voice, having this really intense perspective, keeps them very engaged. And I think that is really what helped, especially, well, for me, particularly, like, having that very immediate perspective, that interesting stylistic choice helped me stick with him through the 1100 words, whereas I may or may not have otherwise. And choices like that can make or break it for readers. So he took a risk there. There were some readers that probably didn't like that, but he took a risk there. I think it worked out really well for him. So definitely, when you were done watching this and you were checking out the other articles, definitely give this one a read. So let's talk a little bit about what these articles need. What things can we improve? There are only 3 things I want to touch on today. Clean writing, good introductions, and visual landmarks. Now, if you've been in workshop with me before, some of these things are kind of going to be old news to you, so feel free to tune out for a while, whatever makes you happy. But let's go over clean writing first. So, I mentioned earlier about Elijah Beam and how I really enjoyed some areas of his writing where it was really smooth, it read really well. Let's pull this out. Let's pull this out right here. So, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of clean writing. Uninteresting, unclear, poorly chosen language can pull a reader off the page or off the screen in this case. And that's the opposite of what you want. Part of keeping your reader engaged is making sure that they can understand what you're saying, and it really takes practice to do that. You would think it would be like a second nature thing, just, oh, this doesn't sound right, but as we're writing, we get so caught up in what we're saying, we get so caught up in our own ideas, that we forget what it might sound like to someone else. We have so much context in our heads, and we know what we mean, so we kind of just assume that the meaning is implied and that we're not projecting our ideas onto our language instead of our language projecting our ideas. There is a difference, a very important difference. So it takes practice to learn when something just isn't working, when it's not doing the job, when it's not getting the point across, or when it just doesn't sound right. And you're gonna have to spend time developing a kind of key eye for discerning, what a messy sentence looks like, whether or not a word is needed, how to say what you want to say. Because often I found that when people are writing messy sentences, it's not that they don't have good things to say, and it's not that they can't write, it's just that they don't quite know the best way to get at what they want to say, so they're trying to put as many pieces together as they can and make it work. And I wish I had a magic wand or a secret trick that I could give to you and, fix that, but it's just something you're gonna have to work at. No one said writing was easy. Whoever does is a liar. So it does take practice, it does take patience, but in the meantime, it does help to do a little bit of extra proofreading, a little bit more intensive proofreading. And what really helps me, and it's helped everyone that I've told to use it, I've seen it used in workshops, from like every workshop I've ever been in, this has been, a piece of advice that I've gotten. It helps a lot if you read your work out loud to yourself. Now, I know it sounds ridiculous, and you're gonna feel ridiculous, and that's okay. You can feel ridiculous. You're by yourself. Nobody's bothering you. But it does help, and the reason it helps is even if you're just whispering to yourself, having to actually form those words and getting them out there, getting them where you can hear them, where you can actually hear how the sentences are working and get a feel for the sentence, like kind of the way it feels when you say it, the way it feels on the tongue. You can catch places where the words just aren't working, where they're really disjointed. Because you'll catch yourself stumbling in those areas. You'll catch yourself, kind of awkwardly moving from word to word or idea to idea, and then you can say, oh, that's a spot that I should probably work on. Let's take another look at it. But let's take a look at what clean writing can do. I'm going to go down here to this paragraph in Zach's article about the gameplay in Legend of Dragoon. So, here's his original paragraph about combat. He says, let's talk about combat. Have it in real time, but where timing matters to deal extra damage. Essentially have it so that the player can select the special attack they want to do, and then have the prompts appear for the combo so that players can execute it properly without having to memorize each attack. It would give a sort of fighting style combo to the combat, which isn't really done in JRPGs. Then add in a hardcore mode implemented in much better ways in a real-time combat system, such as making it an active system that is much harder than pressing circle at the right time in order to negate the counter. Now, that's great. There's a lot of great information there. But we need to do a little bit of work with the language here. There are a lot of either run-on sentences, we have some sentence fragments, we have some places that are grammatically incorrect, we have some places where the sentences just aren't sitting right, or the words are getting jumbled, the ideas aren't quite clear. So let's come over here and see what I've done. Now, fixing a sentence, sometimes you're just going to have to scrap it and start all over. That's usually the best place to start. Sometimes your edits are going to shorten your pieces, and sometimes your edits are going to lengthen them, and either way is okay. I'm going to do an entire workshop later on the economy, what I call the economy of language, and how to get really, really good, at interviewing your words and expressing yourself, but that's another conversation for another day. So let's come back over here. And here is, over here in bold, is the paragraph that I have done. This is my revision where I'm paying special attention to style to flow between ideas, flow between sentences, and flow within a sentence. So, let's talk about combat. I'd like to see a real-time combat system where timing matters. Good timing deals extra damage. Maybe have it so that the player can select the special attack they'd like to do, then show prompts for the combo so that players can execute the attack properly without having to memorize each attack. This would give the combat a sort of fighting style feel, which isn't commonly done in JRPGs. I'd also like to see an additional hardcore mode, where the prompts aren't put in, for those players who enjoy the challenge of memorizing and timing moves. In the old game, there was also a counter mechanic that could be well implemented in a real-time combat system. Ideally, it would be a more active system that requires more coordination and thought than merely pressing a circle at the right time to negate the counter. So, obviously my version is a little bit longer than the original, but you'll see that all I really did here, I popped in a couple of commas, I added some connecting words, a couple transitions here and there, like I'd like to see this, or let's see, I'd also like to see this, couple coordinated conjunctions, you split a paragraph, and in a couple of places I just added an extra phrase, like here, and down here, sort of finish fleshing out the idea, finish rounding it out, and just making it a little bit nicer, a little bit neater, and a little bit more well developed. And you see how much better that sounds, how much better it flows. That's what you're trying to do when you're going back and proofreading. You're looking for these places where the language gets messy, and you're doing whatever you have to do to get it nice, smooth, and a little bit more readable. Now, before I move on and talk about introductions, there's something very important that I want to emphasize, that is something that we as editors struggle with, and that you as writers, often have to talk to us about. Every writer has a voice. We all have individual style. We have these little tricks, these little tick sort of things, and they belong entirely to us. No one else can replicate our style. Not exactly. And oftentimes editing requires reworking language, and it's a balance of learning how to rework language and getting to the point of saying what someone wants to say and how best to say that. It's difficult to do that without sometimes getting in the way of that author's voice. It's very easy to kind of go a little bit crazy on the editing end and say, like, oh, well, this is how I want this sentence to sound, or this is how I think this sentence should be structured. And while that might be, it could just be called tough editing, it's more often than not just a violation of voice. So that's something to be careful of. Don't edit yourself. Essentially what I'm getting to here is don't edit yourself to the point of violating your own voice. Don't feel like you have to fit a specific mold, or that your sentences have to sound a certain way, or whatever it is, like whatever the guidelines are, don't stick to them like right to a T, because you think that's what editors want. Your voice comes first, and you can write good language, like you can write with good language regardless of your voice. But you also have to make sure, kind of in the same vein, that you're not mistaking bad language and poor structure for stylistic choice, that your voice isn't bad language and poor structure. That's not good. We don't want that. So, let's talk about introductions really quickly. First impressions are everything, right? And the same goes for articles. A first paragraph can usually decide whether or not your reader is going to stick around through the rest of your article. So, not only should your introduction engage your reader, but it should also serve as a sort of roadmap so that your reader knows where your article is heading. And let's go over to Elijah here, because Elijah did a great job with his introduction. He says, "We live in an age of reboots and reimaginings, from total reboots like 2013's Tomb Raider to soft reboots like Assassin's Creed Unity. We're seeing a lot of new trends and old ideas. While some games seem fine as they were, a few could benefit from a tune-up. Today, let's reboot a franchise well in need of redemption now that it's under new ownership. Red Faction." So, you see how that not only kind of pulls you in with that first line about the age of reboots and reimaginings. There's a little bit of name dropping there, so we know that like popular titles get mentioned, so it's just anchoring us to stuff that we know, stuff that we're familiar with, that's kind of in the cultural water that might kind of entice us to read further. And then he also he doesn't quite do a full like roadmap as far as what the reboot would look like, but we are going to talk about that. So I'm going to go back to Zaxby's, not because I'm picking on him, but because I see a whole lot of potential here in his intro, and I really wanted to play around with it. So his original intro does a little bit of what I've been talking about. It gives a little bit of context, it has that little bit of engagement. He says, "My first article of the year talked about my feelings for remakes and reboots. While I don't agree with remaking classics or games that have only been out a year or two just to profit on the name, I do agree with remaking something that would be amazing if done properly with the right amount of and the right amount of effort was put into it. That being said, the game I would like to see get the reboot treatment is The Legend of Dragoon." So, again, gets you engaged, kind of gets you thinking, but doesn't quite tell you where you're going. And the point of entry, that thing that's supposed to get you, like, engaged with the article, needs a little bit of refining, a little bit of honing. So, let's come over here where I have made a couple of edits, made it a little bit longer, and see how it sounds. "I don't agree with remaking classics, or rebooting games that have only been out for a year or two, just to profit on a popular name. But I would agree with remaking an amazing game, if it was done properly and the right amount of effort were put into it. There aren't many games that are worth that sort of effort, but The Legend of Dragoon makes that short list. The game got mixed to good reviews, but it has a fairly substantial fan base. I fell in love with it the first time I played it. My dad and I used to take turns trying to get through it. It took us months to finish the first disc and nearly a year to complete the whole game. By the time we reached the end credits, we felt awesome because of how difficult the game was and how interesting its story was. With some real-time updates to the combat system and the addition of customization options, a Legend of Dragoon reboot could really be worthwhile." That's not the best last sentence to me, but I just had to leave it because I couldn't afford to be a perfectionist here. Do you see how this first paragraph like kind of gets you engaged, it gets you thinking, draws you in until he says, boom, The Legend of Dragoon is a game that's worth rebooting. He kind of hits you with his thesis there. And then after he states exactly what it is he wants to say, he goes on to say, here's why. He's got a little bit of personal evidence here, like, he's saying, I love this game so much, it's got a huge fan base, it loves the game a lot. And then we go down here and you'll see that I added sort of the thesis statement part 2 that serves as the roadmap for the rest of the article. Because as we go down, he talks about how good the story was and how the combat system, some things in the gameplay needed a little bit of tweaking, and there was a huge lack of customization that he wanted to see remedied. So we come back here and I say it deserves a reboot because A, interesting story, needs some real-time updates to combat, needs an addition of customization options. And so we've covered all of the big points, the big main ideas in, a very, very short space. And for readers who are kind of in a rush, for readers who aren't going to stick with you through the whole article no matter how much time they have, that's a really good way to kind of give them the gist of what's going on, so they'll at least stay with you through the end of your introduction. And they can see, oh, well, this information down here might be worth picking out, and they can sort of pick and choose where they want to go in your article. And for readers who aren't like time constrained, or for readers who are going to stick with you through all 1100 or however many words, those readers are just going to want a general idea of point A, point B, point C, what their destinations are, so they can kind of realize when they're getting to them. And it gives them a sort of marker that tells them, this is how far I am into the thesis, this is how far I must be into the article, if that makes sense. So that's why that's why I think introductions are super important. And again, they're a lot like clean language. Doing them well, doing them right takes a lot of practice, but unfortunately it's a lot like the grind. You just gotta keep doing it and doing it and doing it until your skill goes up. That's the only option. I wish it were different. It's not. So, last thing I want to talk about is visual landmarks. Now, the importance of visual landmarks. I'm going to go back to Zach's article, not to pick on him this time. So we can see he's got header, image, a little bit of text, header, image, a little bit more text, another image, more text. There's never a lot of space where you don't have some kind of visual something for your eye to cling to. Now, the reason this is important is because when you look at a screen, like say you looked at a screen and saw this to the left of my screen here, this is really overwhelming. Like, this is just kind of a wall of text, and the longer you look at it, the more your head starts to hurt, the more your eyes start to hurt, and the more the words kind of start to blend together, and it's a mess. It's hard on the eyes. It's not good. It's not good for a reader. It's really overwhelming. And so when you go from something like that to something like this seems much more manageable. This is probably about the same amount of words, but this seems a lot more manageable because it's broken up. And it's not just broken up by words or by like paragraph spaces. It's broken up with images, it's broken up with different fonts, with different font sizes. And what that does is it not only breaks up that text so it seems less overwhelming, so it doesn't seem as long, it also helps kind of distract the eye and give it a rest from all that black and white. It pulls the eye down and pulls the eye around the page, so that your reader doesn't lose interest and doesn't start to like kind of wander away and like look elsewhere because their brain is getting tired. And they also they're a little bit manipulative too, because they kind of trick your reader into continuing to scroll down. Because if you're just looking at this article and you're like do, and you're reading this paragraph about, let's say you get to here, this paragraph here, and you're reading the let's talk about combat paragraph, and you get to this line here, fighting style combo to the combat, which isn't really done in RPGs. Let's say you get there, so you scroll your little wheel down, and then you say, oh, there's a picture there, I should just scroll and see what the picture is. And then suddenly your reader has scrolled farther down your page, and they're much more likely to continue reading after the picture because you have tricked them into putting more of your article on their screen. So that is the big reason why we want to see visual landmarks in your work. When you're writing shorter articles, it's not super necessary, but once you get to about the 200 word mark, you're gonna want to start putting things like that in there. And when you're previewing your article, when you're looking at it on this screen to make sure that everything looks okay, you're gonna want to check and see. A good rule of thumb is that you should never, that's not what I wanted. You should never see more than this, like one screen, like one screen page thing, worth of space without seeing some kind of visual landmark. So there should be a header, there should be an image somewhere. So like if we go over to stands here, you see how this whole screen is filled up? Let's go over and see if we can't break that up. We'll make this a bulleted list. And we will let's go right here, right between stalkers and bandits. I just have to move my notes. Moving. Go. Right between stalkers and bandits. Okay. So, we have this, or let's just refresh the page. We have this. Now when you look at it, it's exactly the same amount of text. And I haven't changed anything other than putting these little dots in here, which surprisingly kind of work the way the images do. Bulleted lists do help kind of draw the eye down. And so does the bolding, actually. But I popped one image into the middle of this wall of text, and it is suddenly so much easier to read. It feels a lot more manageable. My head doesn't hurt as much looking at it. It's really kind of magic. It's weird. So you can always play around in these menus over here, like all of these fancy buttons. You can always play around with to kind of see what you come up with. We can insert images, you can embed all kinds of like header media, you can do YouTube videos, Twitch videos. We have a button to make block quotes, we got bulleted lists, numbered lists, there's HTML if you're good at that kind of stuff and you want to put some HTML in there, by all means, go right ahead. And so just to kind of drive the point home, I'm going to show you Elijah's piece. Again, his review article. We got a header here, like an image there, and like some bolding, like another picture and another header, but not a lot other than that. But if we refresh the page, or if we saved it first, because that's something that we actually need to do. Save it first, and then refresh the page. Now we have like big headers, and then a little bit of text, tiny headers, images, and then we have more small headers. It's just, you know, teeny tiny things. And that, I believe, is all I have on the visual landmarks front as well. So, before I sign off, I just want to say that I am so proud to all of you for your work this week. Not a single article that got turned in missed the 300 word mark, which is incredible. Like, that's, a lot of people can't do that, so pat yourselves on the back, be proud of yourselves. If you struggled with this challenge, check out the guide that I recently wrote. I wrote one for long form writing. I will leave a link in the chat / description if you were watching this after our live stream. While you are over on the site, check out the rest of our GameSkinny Writers Workshop articles. Congrats to Stan again for being our article of the week. He will get, once we finish editing his stuff, that will get promoted to the front page on the site. And I'm going to come over here and open up chat. Because if there is anything that you guys would like me to address, anything you want to ask me, any ideas you want to toss out there, now would be the time in this fancy chat box over here. And while I'm waiting for anything in that, look out for your next challenge. That is coming out on Monday, February 16th. Yes, February 16th. Workshop time, Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. is going to stay the way it is for now. We're just going to give it a shot. And again, I'm going to hang around in the chat for a while. So you guys can ask me any questions. You can also email us, comment on videos, or email us at the address that you will see at the end of your stream. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, invite all your friends to write with you, and I will see you guys next time.